Imagine, for a second, an entire generation born not just to live a normal life, but placed right here on Earth with a hidden, incredibly high-stakes mission. In this explainer, we're unpacking a deeply emotional and fascinating framework laid out by the renowned early 20th century mystic and clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. We're going to explore his vision regarding a very specific, highly unique group of souls, those born between 1957 and 1977. Whether you actually fall into this generation yourself, or maybe you just know someone who does, the source material we're looking at today presents this cinematic, almost epic narrative. It's the story of a group placed on Earth during one of humanity's most unstable eras, for one specific reason: to spark a silent revolution. You know, if you were born between 1957 and 1977, chances are pretty high that you've asked yourself one very specific question at some point in your life: why did I always feel different? Seriously, did you always feel like you were somehow seeing right through a world that everyone else just blindly accepted? Did you carry this lingering feeling that your life had some deeper, hidden purpose, even if you couldn't quite put it into words? Well, according to Edgar Cayce's perspective, the answer is actually incredibly profound. His teaching suggests you were never meant to live an ordinary life. You were born right in the middle of a massive clash between the fear of global destruction on one side and the rise of a brand new consciousness on the other, and you were placed here for a very specific mission.
From day one, these individuals found themselves caught in a stark divide. It's like they were split between two worlds. On one side, you have what we could call the imposed reality. Basically, a society built entirely on distraction, conformity, and, well, illusion. But internally, Cayce described them as experiencing an inner awakening. This generation arrived with their spiritual awareness already partially switched on. Even as young kids, they sensed energy, they felt emotions much more deeply than those around them, and they constantly questioned systems that just made absolutely no sense to them. They weren't broken, and they weren't just overly sensitive children. They were spiritually awake souls just trying to survive in a world that was determined to shut those variabilities down.
Now, one of the absolute most defining characteristics of their childhood was this strange, unshakable homesickness. Have you ever felt homesick for a place you couldn't even name? Cayce's teaching suggests these souls had experienced existence way beyond this world. They carried a consciousness that evolved through other dimensions or different forms of reality before they ever even incarnated on Earth. And that's exactly why they often felt so deeply disconnected from normal human behavior. Honestly, a lot of them felt much older than their actual age. But they didn't come here to escape Earth. They came to bring a higher awareness into it. They sensed a much deeper purpose to help transform a world that was really struggling through a period of spiritual darkness.
But we have to be honest here. This immense mission came with an incredible heaviness. For so many in this group, early life was filled with intense family dysfunction, deep inner loneliness, or heavy ancestral trauma. But according to Cayce's vision, this pain wasn't just random bad luck. This generation came in specifically to be cycle breakers. They were the black sheep of the family who challenged toxic, unhealthy traditions and flat out refused to pass down abuse or fear to the next generation. By facing and surviving this intense emotional trauma head-on, they were unknowingly doing the profound, incredibly difficult work of healing entire family bloodlines.
All of that unique background built into one of their most fascinating characteristics. Cayce called it bridge consciousness. This generation had this amazing ability to comfortably hold opposing truths at the exact same time. They could be deeply spiritual, yet entirely practical in their day-to-day lives. They were highly intuitive, yet strictly logical when they needed to be. They were drawn to ancient wisdom while also perfectly adapting to modern technology. While the rest of the world felt totally forced to pick a side, these individuals just lived comfortably between worlds. Sure, it made life confusing and totally exhausting at times, but this specific ability was exactly what humanity needed to cross the gap from division into true understanding.
Okay, this brings us to one of the most mysterious and honestly mind-bending ideas in Cayce's teachings regarding this generation: walk-ins, or soul exchanges. Because the spiritual burden on these individuals was just so incredibly intense, Cayce spoke of a phenomenon where a completely different soul would literally step in later in life to take over and continue the journey. Think about it. If you've ever heard of someone from this era experiencing a dramatic, totally out-of-nowhere personality change in adulthood, like suddenly abandoning their old career, their relationships, or their lifelong beliefs to become an entirely different person, well, this is the metaphysical explanation for that. The mission they were on required drastic, total internal shifts.
This whole journey of spiritual rebirth doesn't just happen overnight. It unfolds across very distinct life stages. You see, this generation was never meant to stay the same person forever. They start out in childhood, a period heavily marked by being deeply misunderstood but spiritually awake. Then, hitting major turning points around their early 30s and mid-40s, they experience those massive life resets and soul exchanges we were just talking about. Everything gets upended. Finally, as they move into their 50s and 60s, they transition into a totally different phase, finding their quiet calling. It is quite literally a lifelong journey of constant, relentless transformation.
And as they evolved through those stages, Cayce suggested they took on this massive, almost cinematic role. He called them timeline weavers. The teachings claim that this generation has a very unusual relationship with time itself. They frequently experience powerful déjà vu, and they just have this gut sense that life could shift dramatically based on a single choice. They aren't just passively living through history, they're actively shaping it. By relying on their deep intuition, they act as timeline weavers, gently guiding human consciousness away from disaster and steering it toward a much wiser direction.
So how are they able to do this? Well, Cayce believed they are essentially living archives. It's as if these souls didn't arrive here empty-handed. They carry deep spiritual memories of humanity's forgotten past. They tend to feel unusually connected to ancient civilizations, and they often feel the heavy emotional weight of historical tragedies that they never personally lived through. They carry this profound spiritual memory so they can recognize repeating patterns. Essentially, they serve as a built-in warning system for an unstable world, stepping in before history has a chance to repeat its absolute worst mistakes.
Their wounds became wisdom. Their survival became medicine. Because of the immense personal pain they survived, so many of them naturally became healers. Maybe they became therapists or teachers, or maybe they're just that fiercely loyal friend that absolutely everyone turns to in a crisis. But Cayce noted that their role actually went even deeper than that. They are meant to counsel the healers themselves. Because they understand suffering at its very deepest root, their own survival naturally transformed into the practical and spiritual medicine that others desperately need in order to heal.
Now, as this generation steps into their later years, a stark shift occurs. The old paradigm, chasing traditional success, fighting loud public battles, constantly needing the spotlight, it all just starts to fade completely. Instead, they embrace a new calling. They completely abandon the need to prove themselves to anyone. Their revolution becomes a totally silent one. They start to focus entirely on holding peace, exerting an invisible influence, and maintaining inner stability. They're no longer out there trying to forcefully push for change. They are transforming the world from the inside out.
This naturally leads to their ultimate mastery, defined in Cayce's vision as becoming frequency holders. In this stage of life, their absolute greatest influence doesn't come from aggressive action or loud, disruptive movements. It actually comes from the pure, grounded energy they carry every single day. Just by being present, their calming energy acts as an anchor for everyone else. Think of them like lighthouses during a massive storm. They aren't out there trying to fight or control the chaotic waves of society. They're just standing firm, providing a guiding light and direction for everyone else who is trying to navigate the darkness.
And this ties into something absolutely fascinating from the source material, the idea of carrying invisible activation codes. A lot of people in this generation notice a really weird pattern. Just having a brief, seemingly ordinary conversation with them can actually trigger a major spiritual awakening or a massive life change in someone else. It's like they carry an energy that just stirs something dormant in other people. Now, it's a beautiful gift for sure, but the text also notes it can be incredibly exhausting for them, which is exactly why so many in this group need long periods of quiet isolation just to recover their own emotional energy.
So, pulling this all together, we can really see the grand narrative arc of their lives. Step 1. Endure profound hardship. Step 2. Develop absolute spiritual unbreakability. And Step 3. Anchor humanity through massive transition. If you have ever wondered why this specific generation faced such relentless pressure, economic instability, and intense personal struggles, well, Cayce's vision says it was all just intense preparation. Every single scar, every period of deep spiritual darkness was a test to ensure they became completely spiritually unbreakable, all so they could hold the line for the rest of humanity today.
Which brings us to a really profound realization. The lifelong struggles of the 1957 to 1977 generation were not meaningless, not even close. They were the unseen foundation beneath the entire spiritual awakening that is happening in the world today. They literally built a bridge between old, fear-based systems and a new, awakened consciousness. And look, most of them will probably never receive public recognition or fame for the heavy burdens they carried. But the truth remains. The bridge is built, and whether the rest of the world realizes it or not, humanity is successfully crossing it right now.
So, I want to leave you with one final question to reflect on today. Have you always felt like you were carrying a purpose you couldn't fully explain? Have you been the one breaking toxic cycles in your own family, or quietly holding everything together for others during incredibly difficult times? If the ideas in this explainer resonated with you, I really encourage you to take a moment and reflect on your own hidden journey. And hey, share your story, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to finally understand their own path. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and as always, keep seeking the truth.